Hello everyone, my name's Julia and I hope this is going to be the first of many videos about mythology, legends, magical beings and folklore, which are subjects that I'm passionate about and on which I have a huge library. Today the subject that we are going to start this channel with is fairies. What are fairies? Surely, if you think of a fairy, the first thing that will come to your mind is a tiny female figure with wings, similar to Disney's Tinker Bell, based on the book of Peter Pan. But the truth is that in the past, fairies had a great diversity of forms. When our ancestors talked about fairies, they didn't imagine the same we do. The stereotypical image of fairies that films and animation have spread comes from the Victorian era, from the 19th century. It can even be traced back to Shakespeare and his Midsummer Night's Dream. But the truth is that in traditional legends, fairies hardly ever have wings, and though there are small ones, there are also human-sized ones, or even bigger. Not all of them are beautiful. Some fairies are old or grotesque, and not all fairies are women, though here in Spain we usually identify hadas with female beings and elfos with male beings. Something that in other countries doesn't happen. For example, in English the words fairy or elf can be exchanged. They are generic names in which is included a great diversity of beings. In France, like in Spain, the word fée is related to female fairies and the word elf or lutan is related to male beings. Well, and what is the origin of the word hada? The word hada comes from Latin word fatum fata, destiny, fate. Why? Because these beings seem to have control over human destiny. In the old stories and fairy tales, the hero often has to ally with a fairy to achieve its goal, otherwise they don't get too far. Fairies are the accomplishers of fate, something like the heirs of Roman Parcas, the Norns of Norse mythology, or the Greek Moiras. In fairy tales, they are always present at the moment of birth, as it happens in the famous tale of the Sleeping Beauty, on which the princess is visited when she is born by a group of fairies, and each of them grants her with a gift. But there was a fairy who hadn't been invited, and this fairy is the one who, angry, casts a curse, because in the original tale there is no witch at all. The evil one is also a fairy, a displeased fairy, because as Catherine Briggs, the great folklorist, says, a bad fairy is a fairy who has been offended, because fairies have a very different morality to that of humans, and they act more by whim rather than by their knowledge of good and evil. This fact was also mentioned by James Matthew Barrie, author of Peter Pan, when he said that Tinker Bell wasn't wholly evil, but she wasn't wholly good either, because fairies are so small that they can only feel one emotion at a time. I must also mention in this video that fairy tales are often the heirs of previous traditions, especially of mythology. We can see how the tale of the Sleeping Beauty is heir of the Greek myth of the wedding of Thetis and Peleus. Thetis was a sea nymph, a nereid. That is why all the gods were invited to their wedding, all except one, and that was the goddess of discord, as it happened in the Sleeping Beauty, on which there was a fairy who wasn't invited. Well, the goddess of discord got angry and dropped a golden apple among the celebrations. On the apple it was written, "To the fairest." Of course, the three main goddesses, Aphrodite, Hera and Athena, started to argue who was the fairest of the three and deserved the present. This discussion would end with the beginning of the Troy War, but that's another story, and we will leave it for another time. What should be clear in this first introduction is that fairies aren't always tiny creatures with wings. On the contrary, there are a lot of different kinds of beings included in this name. But well, where do fairies come from? What is their origin? An old myth from Iceland says that at the beginning of time, Eve, the first woman, was washing her children in a river, when suddenly God came to her. Half of her children were already clean and neat, but the other half were not. So she hid them behind her, because she felt embarrassed about them. She didn't want the Creator to see them so dirty and neglected. But God found out and said to her, "Those sons you have hidden from me will also be hidden from men." And from that day, they remained secretly hidden from the rest of humanity. And this explains the origin of fairies, elves, pixies. There's another Christian myth which tries to explain the origin of fairies. As this story tells, when the angels war took place in heaven between God and Lucifer, part of the angels chose to fight with God, and some other part with Lucifer. And when these last ones lost the war, they were thrown to hell and became demons. But there was a third kind of angels, a group that stayed neutral and didn't fight with any of the sides. And as they weren't good or bad enough, they were thrown to earth, where they stayed to live with us under the form of natural spirits. But neither of these explanations about the origin of fairies convinces me, because they have a religious overtone and surely they were invented in more recent times. We must remember that the belief in fairies comes from older pagan cults. Maybe I'd choose the more literary and romantic explanation that Barry gives in Peter Pan, when Wendy asks Peter about the origin of fairies. He answers, "When the first baby laughed for the first time, its laugh broke into 1,000 pieces, and they all went skipping about, and that was the beginning of fairies. So there ought to be one fairy for every boy and girl." "Ought to be, isn't there?" asked Wendy. And Peter answered, "No, you see. Children know such a lot now. They soon don't believe in fairies. And every time a child says, 'I don't believe in fairies,' there is a fairy somewhere that falls down dead. That is why there are so few of them." To end the video, I'm going to recommend some books about these subjects. One of my favorite ones is Dictionary of Fairies by Catherine Briggs. It focuses especially on Anglo-Saxon folklore, but it also collects legends from other places. It's very complete and follows the structure of a dictionary. I'd also recommend L'Univers Féerique, the Fairy Universe series. The series consists of 5 books. I only have 4. They have been written by French author Edouard Brassy, specialized on these subjects, and he has divided the different magical beings into fairies and elves, dwarfs and gnomes, mermaids and ondines, giants and dragons, and the last book, which I don't have, witches and demons. And well, to recommend something from our legends in Spain, I'd recommend a great series by Carlos Canales and Jesus Callejo, Guide of Magical Beings of Spain. It consists on 3 books. The first one is elves, the second one is fairies, and the last one is gnomes, on which they have included all the other kinds of beings that cannot be considered neither elves nor fairies, especially male beings. Finally, a classic, artistically wonderful, the book Fairies by Alan Lee and Brian Froud, with amazing illustrations by both authors. For those who don't know them, Alan Lee is the illustrator and designer who has participated in the films of The Lord of the Rings and one of the most famous illustrators of Tolkien. Brian Froud is an artist specialized on books about fairies and magical beings. To end, a curiosity, a book which was hard for me to find in Spanish. This is the only Spanish edition, I think. It's The Secret Commonwealth by Robert Kirk. And well, the importance of this book lies in the fact that it's the first essay in history about these beings that has arrived to us. It's from the 17th century. It was written by a Scottish minister who devoted himself to collect all the popular beliefs of his congregation at the time. It includes some protection spells and the beliefs they had about the second sight, the ability to have premonitions and to see beings from the invisible world. And well, this is all for today. I hope that you follow my channel. I will be posting new videos soon speaking about these subjects. See you soon!